So we have rules of exponents, quotient of powers. So the rule is when you're dividing your powers, remember the powers are the little numbers, you're gonna subtract their exponents. So an example would be if I had a to the 6 over or divided by a to the 2nd, that's gonna be the same as a, and then you're gonna take your 6 minus 2, which equals a to the 4th. And we can subtract those because I have an A on the top and an A on the bottom. As long as your letters are the same, you can subtract their powers when you're dividing. So number 1 says we're going to simplify the expression. I have 15 c to the 5th d to the 3rd divided by negative 3 c to the 3rd d to the 2nd. So when I start this, I'm going to look at my coefficients or my numbers in front. Okay? So I have 15, and I'm going to divide that by negative 3, because that's what that division bar, or that fraction symbol is, means I'm going to divide. So 15 divided by negative 3 will give me a negative 5. Okay, then I'm going to move on to my first letter, and my first letter is a C, and I have C to the 5th and divided by C to the 3rd, and remember when we divide those powers, we're actually subtracting them. So I'm going to say C to the 5th minus that 3rd. Okay, and then I have one more letter, which is my D. I have D to the 3rd divided by D to the 2nd. So I'm going to throw my D in there and my 3 minus 2. Okay, now I'm just going to rewrite that and condense that a little bit more. So my negative 5 is not going to change. That's still going to be a negative 5. Then I have C 5 minus 3. So that's going to be C to the 2nd. And then I have D, 3 minus 2. That's just going to be a D. 3 minus 2 is 1. I could stick a little 1 as an exponent right in that corner there. I'm not going to, because if there's no number there, it's just understood that it's a 1. Okay, so this will be your final answer for number 1. Okay, number 2, we have 21, a to the 7th, b to the 2nd, divided by 28, a to the 3rd, b to the 7th. Okay, so when I do this, I'm going to start with my coefficients. My coefficients are 21 and 28. Well, we can't divide 21 by 28. Nothing's going to come out evenly. It's going to end up being a decimal number, and we don't want a decimal number. So we have to think, what number will go into both 21 and 28? Well, I know 7 will go into both numbers, so I'm going to divide the top by 7. If I divide the top by 7, I also have to divide the bottom by 7. Okay, so 21 divided by 7 will give me a 3. And then 28 divided by 7 is going to give me a 4. So we did those. Now I'm just going to rewrite this. A to the 7th, B to the 2nd, and we have A to the 3rd, B to the 7th. Okay, I'm not quite done yet because I still want to simplify these even more. So when I'm thinking I'm subtracting these, so my 3/4 is going to stay the same. And now I have to think, I'm subtracting the letters or the powers of the letters, so the exponents on the letters. So I know 3/4 stays the same, okay? When I subtract, my answer is going to go where the bigger number is. So on this first one here, I have A to the 7th and A to the 3rd. Well, 7 minus 3 is 4. My A, my bigger A to the 7th is on top, so my A to the 4th is going to go on top. Okay, then I have B to the 2nd and B to the 7th. So divided by. Okay, so remember, you're still subtracting. You're not dividing, you're subtracting. So I have 7 minus 2. Remember, you always start with your bigger number when you're doing this. 7 minus 2, and your answer is going to go where the bigger number is. So 7 minus 2 is 5. 7 is bigger, it's on the bottom. So that's going to be B to the 5th. And that will just be your final answer. So 3a to the 4th divided by 4b to the 5th. And I can't simplify that anymore because I can't do anything else with the numbers and I can't do anything else with the letters. So I know I'm good with that one. Okay, we're going to start doing the same thing with the first one. So I have 3x to the 5th, y to the 2nd, divided by x to the 8th, y to the 6th, z. Okay, when I look at my coefficient or my number in front, I only have a 3 on top. I don't have anything else. So I know that 3 is just going to stay on top. So I'm going to go ahead and write that 3 on top. Okay, now I'm going to look at my x's. When I look at my x's, I have x to the 5th divided by x to the 8th. Remember, when we're dividing, we're actually subtracting. So I'm going to take that 8 minus that 5. Remember, you take the big number and subtract it from the smaller number, and it lands where the big one is. So 8 minus 5 is 3. The 8 is bigger, and that's on the bottom. So I know my x is now going to go on the bottom. And it's going to be x to the 3rd because of that 8 minus 5. Okay, now I'm going to look at my y's. I have y to the 2nd and y to the 6th. Okay, so 6 minus 2 is 4. The 6 is on the bottom, so that y to the 4th is going to be on the bottom. Okay, and then I just have a lonely z here. There's nothing that I can do with that. It is just a z. So, and the z is already on the bottom, so it's not going to move because I didn't change it in any way. So that z is just going to stay on the bottom there. So your 3 is going to be on top, and then you have x to the 3rd, y to the 4th, and z on the bottom. Okay, looking at number 4, I have -3, a to the 4th, b to the 2nd, or sorry, b to the 7th, over 21, a to the 2nd, b to the 7th, c to the 5th. Okay, so my first job is to look at those coefficients. Okay, so I have a -3 and a 21. Okay, so when I think, what will go into both a 3 and a 21? And I know I can divide them both by 3. So I'm going to divide the top by 3, and I'm going to divide the bottom by 3. Okay, 3 divided by -3, or -3 divided by 3, is going to give me a -1. So my top is going to be a -1, and then 21 divided by 3 gives me that 7. Okay, so I started with my coefficients. Now I'm going to look at my a's. A's come first in that alphabet, so I'm going to start there. And I have a to the 4th and a to the 2nd over a to the 2nd. Remember, when we divide these, we're actually subtracting them. So 4 minus 2 is 2. And because the 4 is bigger on top, that a is going to go on top, and then that 2 belongs with that a. Now I'm going to look at my b. I have b to the, whoops, that's not a highlighter. I have b to the 7th and b to the 7th. Well, when I think of 7 minus 7, that gives me 0. So really, I have b to the 0 power. Well, if you remember before, anything to the 0 power equals 1. So that's just throwing a 1 by this other -1. So it's like -1 times 1. Well, that's going to still be -1. So you don't even have to represent that. You don't have to show that. Those b's just cancel out. So we're not going to write b's at all. So the next step I'm going to look at is that c. I have c to the 5th, and it's only on the bottom. I can't add any, or I can't subtract anything to it because there's nothing else that has a c on it. And because it's on the bottom, it's going to stay on the bottom. So now I have c to the 5th. That's not going to change at all. And everything, I know I'm done because I only have one coefficient. I can't simplify those anymore. I have one a and I have one c. So I know that that one is done. Okay, this next one we're going to combine what we learned in our last LT and what we learned in this LT. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is simplify what's in parentheses. Okay, and it's still dividing, so we're still going to be subtracting. So on the top, when I look at my c, there's nothing I can do with my c because I only have that one. So that's still going to be c to the 2nd. Okay, but when I look, I have two d's. So when I'm looking at my d's, I have d to the, and remember, if there's no number there, it's d to the 1st, over d to the 5th, or divided by d to the 5th. When we divide, we're going to subtract those. So I have d to the 5th minus d to the 1st, and that's going to give me d to the 4th. And I put that on the bottom because that d to the 5th is bigger than that d to the 4th. Or sorry, d to the 1st. Okay, so it turns out to be a d to the 4th and it's on the bottom. Well, then I have these parentheses around it, and I have this 2 right here. Well, remember, anytime we have the exponent on the outside of the parentheses, we have to do that 2 times. So now I'm going to rewrite that, and I'm going to say c to the 2nd over d to the 4th, and that's big parentheses around it. And I'm going to write it again because of that 2. c to the 2nd over d to the 4th. Okay, if you remember, If there's nothing in between those parentheses, that means that they're being multiplied. And when we multiply, we add our exponents. So my c's are both on top. When I look at my c's, I have c to the second and c to the second. Well, I have to add those exponents. So that's going to give me c to the fourth on top. And we're going to do the same thing on the bottom. When I look at those, I'm looking at my exponents, and I have a 4 on my first set and a 4 on my second set. So when I add those, that d is going to stay on the bottom. So I'm going to have d on the bottom, and then an 8 and an exponent of 8, because that 4 plus 4 is 8. There's no other c's and there's no other d's, so I know I am done with that one. I don't have to do any more with that. Okay, so number 6, we're going to look and see what we can simplify inside the parentheses before we do anything with that exponent on the outside. When I look, I have this 3 right here, this coefficient 3. Well, there's nothing else I can do with that 3 because there's no other number. So that 3 is going to remain on top as a 3. Then I'm going to look at my x's, and I have x to the second and x to the first, so divided by x to the first. Well, those x's, when we divide, we're going to subtract them. So x to the second minus x to the first is just an x, and because the 2 is bigger, that x goes on top. Okay? Then I'm going to look, and I have a y to the fifth on the bottom. Well, I'm looking at, and I don't have any other y's in that whole problem. So that y to the fifth just stays on the bottom. And then I'm going to put parentheses around it again, and that 3 goes on top. Remember, when you have that exponent of 3 on the outside, that means you have to do it 3 times. So I have 3x to the second over, whoops, I'm sorry, I'm writing the problem from the top. I'm going to have 3x over y to the fifth. That's going to be my first set. I'm going to write it again, 3x over y to the fifth. And then one more time, 3x over y to the fifth. Okay, now we have to remember we're going to start with our coefficients or our numbers. So when I'm looking, I have a 3 times a 3 times a 3. Well, 3 times 3 is 9, and then 9 times another 3 is a 27. So my coefficient on the top is going to be a 27. Okay, and now I'm going to look at my x's. I have 1x right here, 1x right here, and 1x right here. Remember, when we multiply those coefficients, we add them. So that means I have an x to the third, because there's 3 of them. And then we're going to put it over what we have on the bottom. Well, we only have y's on the bottom. So when I'm looking at those y's, I have 5 on this y, 5 on this y, and 5 on this y. So when you add all those up, 5 plus 5 plus 5, you're going to get 15. So my y is going to stay on the bottom, and it's going to be y to the 15th. And that's going to be my final answer. So number 7, I'm looking for any coefficients right away. So I don't see any numbers that are ahead of the letters, so I don't have to do anything with that. So the next thing I'm going to do is simplify and see, is there anything I can take care of inside those parentheses? Okay, so when I look at that one, I can see that I have x to the third divided by x to the fifth. Okay, so x to the third divided by x to the fifth, I'm just going to write my letter. So 5 minus 3 is 2, and because x to the 5 is on the bottom, I'm going to do my x to the 2 on the bottom. I'm just going to leave the top open for right now. Okay, now I'm going to go for my y. And I see I just have this one lonely y on top. So now I can write that one lonely y on the top and not do anything with it. I'm going to put parentheses around the whole problem. Okay, and then I see that little 4, so it's going to be raised to the 4th. So my next step is to write that 4 times. So I have y over x2, y over x2, y over x2, and one more time, y over x2. Okay, so let's start with our y's. I have 1y, 2y, 3y, 4y's. So that tells me I have y to the 4th over, and now let's look at our x's, and I have 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 2. So my x's are going to go on bottom. So I have x, and 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 gives me an 8. So I have x to the 8th. And that will be your final answer. Okay, last one. We have 4x to the third y over 6xy to the second, and then squared. First step is to always simplify your coefficients. So 4, 6. Well, I know I can't take 4, 6 and just divide those two out. But I can look and think, what will go into 4 and 6? And I know I can divide both by 2. So I'm going to divide the top, divide the top by 2. If I divide the top by 2, I also have to divide the bottom by 2. So I'm going to start with that. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. Then I'm going to look at my x's, and I have x to the third divided by x. So 3 minus the 1x on the bottom gives me a 2. Because that x to the third is on the top, I'm going to write x to the 2 on the top. And then I'm going to look at my y's. Okay, so I have y to the first divided by y to the second. Well, 2 minus 1 is 1. Because that 2 is on the bottom, my y is going to go on the bottom. Again, I could write that 1 on there, but I don't have to. Then I'm going to put all of this in parentheses. And because you have it, it was already raised to the second, we're going to raise it to the second. Well, now, because it's raised to the second, I'm going to rewrite that whole thing, and I'm going to do it 2 times because of the second. So 2x squared divided by 3y. And one more time, 2x squared divided by 3y. Okay, so now I'm going to start with my whole numbers, or my coefficients. So I have a coefficient of 2 here and a coefficient of 2 here. So 2 times 2 is 4. So that's going to equal 4 on the top. And now I'm going to look at my coefficients on the bottom. I have 3 here and I have 3 here. Well, 3 times 3 is 9, so my 9 goes on the bottom. Okay, now I'm going to look at my x's. So I have x to the second on my first set and x to the second on my second set. When we're multiplying those, we have to add them. So 2 plus 2 is 4. I have no other x's, so that one has to go on the top, so it's x to the 4th. Now we're going to look at the bottom. And I just have one y right here and a y here. So y to the first and y to the first. Remember, we have to add those powers, so now that's going to turn into y to the second. And that will be my final answer because I can't simplify it anymore. That's it for the notes videos today. Please let us know if you have questions.